right, so thank you for joining me this evening. Like John said, I'm Matt Sargent. I'm a trustee with the Historical Society. And for over 10 years now, I've been doing research into the men from Marlborough that made the ultimate sacrifice in the service. A lot of the research has been on World War II. So I'll preface that by saying it's all men. There were a lot of women from Marlborough that did serve, but none of them died in the service. So you'll be hearing tonight about a lot of the names you'll recognize. They're old Marlborough names, and you'll also be hearing about a lot of names that you probably won't recognize. So my mantra for this project has been by birth, by life, or by death. So anyone that was born in Marlborough, they are included. Anyone that lived in Marlborough. So you'll see that throughout the presentation. And anyone that is buried in Marlborough. So a lot of times, if the mother's family was from Marlborough and she had a son who was killed, they were buried here. If you've gone to any of my presentations before, I always like to take a second to thank, if there's any Korean era or Vietnam era veterans in the crowd. Yeah, if you could just raise a hand, and yeah, we'll do a round of applause. So thank you. And so I made the joke that I have 159 slides to get through, and I actually wasn't kidding. So we're just going to kick this off. We'll save all questions to the end, and we'll kind of go from there. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Marlborough's service and sacrifice in World War II. And this photo is actually Clayton Lazat's funeral after he was killed in France. So the lead up to World War II, a brief review. I like this picture of Main Street Marlborough from back in the day. 18th of September 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria. May of 1936, Italy invades Ethiopia. Italy invades and annexes Ethiopia. The 1st of November 1936, the Rome-Berlin Axis is announced. The fascist powers were coming together. The 25th of November 1936, Germany and Japan signed the Anti-Comintern Pact, which is against communist Russia. The 7th of July 1937, Japan invades China itself. The 13th of March 1938, Germany incorporates Austria, and this is known as the Anschluss. The 29th of September 1938, Czechoslovak Republic cedes the Sudetenland to Germany. They said that the people that were living in this land were German-speaking, so therefore they had to be German. It sounds a little bit similar to today's with the Russian-speaking, they should be Russian, right? The 15th of April 1939, Italy annexes Albania down by Yugoslavia. The 23rd of August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union sign a non-aggression pact. This wouldn't last long. The 1st of September 1939, Germany invades Poland, and the Soviet Union also did, so they split Poland between them. From September 1939 to December 1941, conflict continues to grow and bring all of mainland Europe into the fold. Poland is broken up by the Soviet Union and Germany. The Soviet Union invades Finland. Germany invades Norway and Denmark, and eventually France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The Soviet Union further invades Romania, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Great Britain defeats Germany in the air war known as the Battle of Britain. Italy invades Egypt, Greece, and the Axis powers together invade Yugoslavia. So we call it the World War. It's for a very good reason. This is pretty much the entire world. On the 7th of December 1941, we all know the date that will live in infamy. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And right from the get-go, men were already serving in the military from Marlborough. So the first man we'll talk about tonight, Woodrow Hood. He was a private, and he enlisted in 1939 while he was living in Colorado. He was with the 1st Marine Defense Battalion, and he was killed right before Christmas, 1941, at the Battle of Wake Island. So this is one of the, we always think of Pearl Harbor, but Japan really invaded a lot of our other territories, the fighting in the Philippines, and they fought all throughout, not only us, but our allies with the UK and the Dutch. Woodrow actually enlisted under his brother Severe's name while living in Denver. His brother got a civilian conservation corps job, but then didn't want to take it, and he didn't want to miss the spot because he needed money. So he went and took the job under his name and enlisted under his brother's name. So when his parents received a letter from the military saying that Severe had been killed in action, they were sitting with Severe. So they kind of understood that Woodrow had been killed. And so he's the first man from Marlborough to die in World War II, and the American Legion post down on Maple Street is co-named for him. And there's a number of books that actually do mention him in the battle and fighting at Wake Island. From the 7th of January 1942 until the 9th of April 1942, you have the Battle of Bataan. Bataan, Corregidor, the fighting in the Philippines, Douglas MacArthur. They estimate the Bataan Death March killed between 5,000 and 18,000 Allied and Filipino troops that were captured. So this was a very brutal time in the beginning. We left a lot of troops there. That was kind of controversial at the beginning of the war. So Francis Brazu was a private. He enlisted again before the war started in 1940, the 17th Pursuit Squadron, and he died of disease as a prisoner of war in the Philippines, the 25th of May, 1942. So I'll take a pause real quick. If everybody can see this, I have each of the men, the spirit de corps with the military. Everyone is proud of their units. I tried to put as much as I can. So this is the 17th Pursuit Squadron insignia, the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor. So you'll see these throughout. They're just representations of the units the men served with. And then down here we have the medals they would have earned. So in the packets that are in the back, if you didn't grab a packet, they're there. There's a whole breakdown of the different medals and what they mean. And I'm going to highlight some of the ones that were a little bit more, awards for bravery as we go throughout. So many of the 17th Pursuit Squadron were actually evacuated to Australia. And we're talking with some of the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor, the memorial organizations. They're not sure why he would have been left behind. And the story I've been told, his sister is actually still alive in town. And there was he knew he was dying, and he had his wallet or some identification that he gave to a friend from Western Mass and said, if you survive, get this to my mother. And he actually did survive and brought it home. So you recognize some of these names. Brazu Road in Marlborough. From the 4th to the 7th of June, 1942, the Battle of Midway. So this was a big gamble. We wanted to the Japanese wanted to lure us out towards Midway Island and try to sink the carriers, and then they wouldn't have a problem taking over the rest of Asia. And we wanted to do the same thing, and this actually turned out in our favor. Richard Worcester, one of the few men as we go through this, you'll see I have photos of everybody but a few. Richard was a seaman second class. He enlisted right before the war, and he served on board USS Yorktown CV-5, and he was killed in action the 4th of June, 1942 at the Battle of Midway. So he enlisted when he was 17 years old, and while he was studying at the Worcester Boys Trade School. He was living in Marlborough, but he was also raised out in Uxbridge, so they have him on the memorial as well. And he actually was still 17 at the time of his death. So they would allow you, with the parent's signature, to go into the military. And we see that with a number of these men, that they were very young. On the 7th of August, 1942, the United States forces land on Guadalcanal. And this, when I started learning about World War II history, I always thought of Guadalcanal was like that small little piece. You see the Marines on Guadalcanal, and that's kind of the famous part of it. But the battle on Guadalcanal lasted for a very long time. It wasn't just a couple months. It was a very long campaign. And it also included the Army as well and the Navy. So Nicholas Masciarelli was an electrician's mate, third class, and he served on board USS Vincennes, which is a heavy cruiser. And he was killed in action the 9th of August, 1942 at the Battle of Savo Island. The Vincennes acted as a screen for the carrier Yorktown during the Doolittle raid. So if anybody's familiar with the Doolittle raid, when we launched bombers off of an aircraft carrier and bombed mainland Japan as kind of a, you mess with us, we're going to mess with you right back. So he was there for that. And the slot, which was the area that the Navy was patrolling in and out of Guadalcanal, became known as Iron Bottom Sound because so many ships were sunk during those battles. Daniel Cashman was a private. He served with the 7th Marine Regiment of the 1st Marine Division, and he was killed in action the 28th of October, 1942 at the Battle of Guadalcanal. So he's actually studying at Bentley College when he enlisted, and had recently been married. And he was killed in action by a hand grenade attack on his company's position. Julius Kelber was a bosun mate, first class, and you can see he enlisted in December of 1926. So he was a career Navy man. I was able to get his personnel file, and unfortunately it didn't have his boot camp photo, but he was promoted to chief bosun mate, which in the Navy, being promoted to a chief is a big deal. He probably never even knew that, unfortunately. And he was killed in action on board the USS Walk, the 15th of November, 1942. He also served aboard USS Florida, USS Pennsylvania, USS Fairfax, USS Hannibal, and USS Altair. So he served for a long time, number of ships. Edmund Ethier was a motor machinist mate, first class, and he served on board USS LST-342, and he was killed in action the 18th of July, 1943. So the landing ship tanks were large, extremely large landing craft that could move a lot of troops and a lot of rolling stock, and this was actually torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. He's also enlisted in 1929, but he only did his one enlistment. And he served on board USS Wyoming, USS Nitro, and the USS Arkansas. And he served aboard the USS Ancon in the European theater, participating in the landings in North Africa before being transferred to the LST. His daughter had a lot of great photos. I really like this photo of him with his daughter and his wife. He seemed like he was a happy fella. Joseph Fontaine, who was a corporal, he enlisted the 29th of December, 1941, and he was with the 1st Marine Regiment of the 1st Marine Division. And sadly, he was killed in a training accident in Australia the 16th of August, 1943. And so he was one of the Wayside Inn boys. So with the Wayside Inn school being close by, some of the boys actually lived up here on Gay Street, which I think is right around the corner here. There were 2 of them, actually. I think they lived in the same house. And they enlisted, both of them enlisted in the Marine Corps. And again, he did fight on Guadalcanal. And while they were doing training exercises for the next campaign, a mortar round landed short and killed him and another other men. So on the 8th of November, 1942, Allied forces landed in Algeria and Morocco in French North Africa. And the 13th of May, 1943, the Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered to the Allies. So you can see that campaign kind of lasted quite a while, from November till May. On the 10th of July, 1943, Operation Husky is the Allied landings in Sicily. And so not all the deaths that we're going to talk about tonight and all the sacrifices that were made were combat related. So Joseph McAdam, this is a name that probably not many people are familiar with. He lived in Marlborough as a young man in the early 1920s before moving to Los Angeles. And he owned and operated a shipping company with one of his brothers. And he worked like basically a USPS or UPS before that was a thing. And he enlisted a couple days before the war. I think he was drafted, and he served in the 510th Army Postal Unit. So they were using his skills, from his job to help with the mail overseas. And he ended up falling from a bus in London, one of the double deckers. Jack Perlman, private first class. He served in the 120th Combat Engineer Battalion. He was originally from Manchester, New Hampshire, and was proudly a man of Jewish faith. And he was living in Marlborough with his brother when he enlisted. And he actually had gotten married in South Boston shortly before that. He died of a brain tumor in Tunisia, but he had served in Sicily fighting with the 45th Infantry Division. On the 9th of September, 1943, Operation Avalanche, the landings at Salerno. This is the landings in mainland Italy. So the Italian government surrendered to the Allies on the 8th of September. So they knew that the writing was on the wall. On the 20th of November, 1943, Operation Galvanic, the landings on Tarawa Atoll. So when we talk about the Pacific War, the island hopping campaigns, all those small islands that we either landed on and took over or bypassed so that we didn't have to take them over, were critical to keep the push going towards Japan, both from the Central Pacific and from the Western Pacific, the 2 different routes that we were trying to go through for that. Tarawa was a bloodletting for the Marines. They thought they could use the amphibious tractors that they have here. And if anybody goes to the American Heritage Museum, they have one of these. That's really great to see. They thought they could roll right up to the beach, and they realized that they couldn't get too far. So some of the Marines had to wade like hundreds of yards under fire to get just to the beach. I can only imagine what that would have been like. So we're lucky. We also have the Hillside School in Marlborough. So Thomas Munn was a private, and he served with the 2nd Marine Amphibian Tractor Battalion, and he was killed in action on the 20th of November at the Battle of Tarawa. So he was a graduate of the 1940 class from the Hillside School, and he loved farming, and he looked forward to a career in the field after the war. So the Hillside School actually has letters he wrote from while he was training with the Marines around the country, saying how he didn't enjoy the Marine Corps too much, but he was really looking forward to becoming a farmer. So the Hillside School was a really good avenue for a lot of young men. On the 22nd of January, 1944, Operation Shingle, the Allied landings at Anzio. So the Germans were thoroughly entrenched along different lines going up the boot of Italy. And to try to get past that, we thought we could kind of go up the coast and bypass one of their lines. And that was the thought process behind the Allied landings at Anzio. The problem was that we got stalemated on the beach. And that took a long time to have that stalemate be broken. So you're going to see a lot of men here that were killed in Anzio. Private Alfred Gregoire with the 180th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division. So he was actually wounded in action on Sicily, went back to his unit, and he was killed during an artillery attack on his position. During a large German counterattack on the Anzio beachhead. So they had a rail gun. They had a cannon that was so large, they had it on a gigantic train chassis, and they would move it out of the mountain and shoot rounds as large as that van at the beachhead, as well as bombers, regular attacks with regular artillery. So this was a very precarious place to be in. Francis McShane, so another name we might not recognize here in Marlborough. He was born in Marlborough, and he's buried in Marlborough. But he was raised in Northborough, so he's on the Northborough honor roll. Northborough Historical Society actually had some of his photos, and they have his Purple Heart. He originally enlisted before the war started, and he served with the National Guard, the 181st Infantry Regiment, and he was with the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, and he was killed in action on the 22nd of February, 1944. He was a graduate of Northborough High School, and he was mobilized for federal service. So a lot of the men that were in the Guard before the war began, when the war started, they were all told they were now fully mobilized and they were full-time. Francis Girard, again enlisted in 1940. He served with the 30th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division. Again, another member who was with the 181st Infantry Regiment that was mobilized, and he left behind a wife and 2 children. Donald Sheridan was a staff sergeant. He served in the 157th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division, and he was killed in action on the 27th of May, 1944. So he was a 1934 graduate of Marlborough High School, and he was working in the Marlborough hardware store when he enlisted. And he was killed in action during the Anzio breakout. Interestingly enough, for any of the real diehard military fans, he was awarded an Air Medal, and I have his personnel file that concludes that. I haven't found why, because an infantryman being awarded an Air Medal is very weird. That's like an Air Force thing. So for infantrymen to have that award is I'm hoping to find why, but more research is needed. Roland Termaine. So he was with the 180th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division. This was actually from the Boston Globe, this photograph. I thought that was pretty neat that one of our hometown guys was there with that. So along with his wife, they were known as a country western duo, Tex and Millie. And I found some stuff saying that they were actually on the Gene Autry show. So they were pretty big around here, with their country western duo. And he was a father to his wife's 2 children. They didn't have any children, but she had 2 children from a previous marriage. John Chase, also the 179th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Infantry Division. He was an only child and worked at a gas station before enlisting. He married Amelia Lombardi 4 days before he went into the army. And the Allied troops liberate Rome on the 4th of June, 1944. So right shortly after he was killed, they liberated Rome. So George Pando, another name we may not recognize here in Marlborough. He was born in Marlborough, along with his brother Victor, and he served in the 351st Infantry Regiment of the 88th Infantry Division. And he was killed in action the 10th of June, 1944, just north of Rome near Monterossi, Italy. Laurice Langelier. So the Langelier name is familiar to us here in Marlborough. This would be kind of like one line removed from the families that we're kind of aware of. So like a cousin. He was with the 201st Ordnance Maintenance Company, and he died of an accidental death the 7th of July, 1944. He was born and raised in Vermont, but lived in Marlborough for his first year of high school before graduating from the Pinkerton Academy. And he was driving a Jeep that crashed and the fuel tanks leaked, and he was covered in flaming gasoline. And he had the forethought to dive into a puddle of mud And they actually thought, he would recover from how badly he was burned. And he sadly got sick with pneumonia, which is common with burns. So from 1939 to 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic, this was our way of the Lend-Lease program to get supplies over to Europe and especially to our allies in England, but also up to Russia in Murmansk. And that's, I say that we won World War II because we're better at logistics than everybody else. Our ability to get all the supplies to the men on the front lines was what kept us in the fight. And the Battle of the Atlantic was integral to that. So James McAnally, our only civilian that was killed in action, he was on board the RMS Lady Hawkins, which was torpedoed the 19th of January, 1942. His only brother, Thomas, was killed in World War I, and he was working nights, and he was training to be a veterinarian during the day, but he kind of ran out of money to be able to finish school, so he signed up to be a government contractor, and we were building bases everywhere at the time. And sadly, he was on the Lady Hawkins when she was headed to Bermuda, and it was torpedoed. Rennie Boulet was a fireman third class on board USS Ingraham and was lost at sea the 22nd of August, 1942. He lived in Marlborough as a young man, but was raised in Fitchburg. And the Ingraham collided with the USS Chum-Ung and was sunk instantly. So a destroyer, a DD, so some of the designations, a DD would be a destroyer, a DE would be a destroyer escort, BB would be a battleship. The DD would probably have around 200 men on board. So when the ship sunk, they were ready for battle stations. All the depth chargers were on deck and primed, and the ship sunk, and everyone in the water, the depth chargers started to go off. So a crew of 200 men, only 11 survived. Clarence Hinkson. So I just uploaded this photo tonight. This, if any of you are aware, the city's naming some new squares in town. He's going to have a square named for him. And the only photo we had was very grainy newspaper. His family had nothing. There was no files. Really not a lot to go on for him. But someone was able to go and really take the time to fix this photo up. I thought this came out really well. He was an apprentice seaman. So he enlisted the 2nd of August, 1942. So remember that date. And he was on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Muskeget, which was a weather, like a weather ship, WAG 48. And he was killed in action the 9th of September, 1942. So he was in the Coast Guard for 39 days before he was killed. He was raised as a foster child here in Marlborough. And he was very young. He had just turned 18. The thought was to send some of the young folks, and especially in the Coast Guard, to a weather ship. Like, it's just going to sit out there and read the weather. And the Germans torpedoed it. So Emil Danjou was a private. He served in the Army Air Corps. And he was one of 674 men who were killed when the U.S. Army transport Dorchester was torpedoed off Greenland. So if we look when it was torpedoed, the 3rd of February, 1943. So if you can imagine how cold it is here in February, and then go off of Greenland in February. And the men had very few minutes in the water before they were dead.
That's when the 4 chaplains died.
That's correct. So the Dorchester was famous of the 4 chaplains. So if anybody is interested in that story, it's pretty amazing. The chaplains all knew that they were pretty much going to die. The panic was setting in aboard the ship, and they all started praying and singing, and they gave all their life jackets to some of the men who were clearly upset and knew they couldn't swim. Really incredible story. Some of the American Legion posts do events about that, and we may look at doing that here in Marlborough. Charles Connolly, so another name we might not remember. Machinist mate, 2nd class. He served on board USS Henry Mallory, ID 1280, so a troop transport. And he was killed in action the 7th of February, 1943. So that Charles was born in Marlborough, but he lived in Manchester, New Hampshire, and worked at the Rollins Engine Company. So that's why he was a machinist mate. He knew how to work on engines. And 232 men were killed when the Mallory was torpedoed off of Iceland. So the 7th of February off of Iceland, again, the same principle. Minutes in the water. William Crosby, so I know Crosby Road is right near me. He was Seaman First Class, and he served on board USS Turner, which was DD 648. And the ship exploded in New York Harbor in the 3rd of January, 1944. So he participated in numerous convoy operations to North Africa. The destroyers were what was going to fight off the submarines. So they would ride with the convoys, and when they would find the sonar hits or a submarine they would find surface, they would chase it and try to depth charge it, shoot it with the deck guns. So these were the only defense that many of the convoys had. The merchant ships were completely unarmed for the most part. The Turner suffered internal explosions and capsized, taking 138 men with her. They think they were moving ammunition in the forward area that was actually live, and the men maybe didn't realize that they had primed the rounds. Bernard Lyle Jr., so Bunny Lyle is actually on the Hudson Monument, but he was a longtime mechanic at the Marlborough and Grafton airports and specialized in aircraft maintenance. So he taught at the Naval Air Technical School in Memphis, Tennessee, and he served with Patrol Bombing Squadron 209, and he was killed in action the 16th of July, 1944. So while he was aboard a PBM Mariner, these are large, huge Navy aircraft that would patrol and try to find submarines to keep them away from the merchant ships, keep them away from the convoys. They were diving to attack one, and they went right into the ocean. So on the 6th of June, 1944, Operation Overlord, the Allied landings at Normandy. How many people in here have seen Band of Brothers? There's a lot of hands there. So not easy company, but we have our own paratrooper from the 101st Airborne, Eugene Lambert. So he was originally enlisted in 1938, so he'd been in the National Guard for quite a while. And when the call came for paratroopers, people interested in jumping out of airplanes and that whole thing, he was one of the first group to volunteer. And he served in Company A, the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. And he was killed in action on D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. I tried to do as best I could to find, was the plane shot down? Was he killed, in the air? There's not as much documentation as I thought there would be. But he was killed in action near Bougainville, France. John Bacher was a staff sergeant with the 175th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 16th of June, 1944. So he was wounded in action near Saint-Lô, France, and reported directly back to his unit after being recuperated in the hospital. And he was only to be killed in action fighting against German paratroopers. So he had one brother, but the brother didn't have any children, so I actually was able to get in touch with John's cousins, and they provided some of these photographs. And they said that they were pretty young when he died and when they knew him, but they said that he was a pretty scrappy guy. Like, he wouldn't really take much from anybody. I thought that was kind of cool. Wilfred Demers, Private First Class, the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division. So a lot of times when men would join the Army would do what they need with you. If they need to move you to a different unit, they need to change what your job is, they need you to do whatever, that's what would happen. So a lot of times we see that men will be in multiple different units until they are with the unit that they ended with. But Wilfred actually was with the 83rd Infantry Division his entire time in the Army. So he was with them from their time in Indian Gap, Indiana, all the way through. I found that kind of interesting. And he was killed in action near Saint-Denis, France. His nephew, Richard Wilfred Demers, who has the name share there, was killed in action in Vietnam. So from the 15th of June to the 9th of July, 1944, we have the Battle for Saipan, the Marianas Islands. So the Marianas Islands were key, again, as that island hopping campaign moves north. Guam, Saipan, Tinian, these islands were perfect spaces to have airfields so that we could have bombers get closer and closer and closer to Japan. I actually spent 4 months on Saipan, and it's pretty amazing just to see. It's not really that built up. It's a lot of dirt roads still. But it's a part of the Marianas American Protectorate, so American territory, Guam as well, Tinian. Victor Pando, so George's brother, he served with the 25th Marine Regiment of the 4th Marine Division. Again, he was born in Marlborough. He was recommended for a Bronze Star for his actions on the first day at the Battle of Saipan. It was not awarded, but for any of the folks that are in the military, the Marines are not really ones to give out awards very easily. So that's to be recommended for a Bronze Star for the Marines is pretty amazing. So Albert Hood, Woodrow Hood's brother, there were a total of 4 or 5 Hoods. And I actually have another picture of all of them together. Well, it's not all of them together. It's all of them. And then it's a couple. They took the pictures of the ones that were already deployed, and they had them like next to the family. Does anyone remember Sliva Hood? Yeah. I remember working for Sliva and being like amazed. These were his brothers. I was also amazed that they buried him in his Marine Corps uniform with a cigar stub in his mouth. That was pretty amazing. A proud Marine family. Albert Hood. So he enlisted with his brother George and was one of 6 of the Hood family to serve in the military. And he was the second to be killed in action. Ernest Flynn, private first class with the 6th Marine Regiment of the 2nd Marine Division. Again, one of the Wayside Inn schoolboys. So he lived here on Gay Street. And originally was trained as a counterintelligence Marine. So he was a very intelligent person to be able to have that specialty in the Marine Corps. But he was sent ashore as an infantryman on Saipan. So again, we talked about Saipan started in the battle in June, and we're looking towards the beginning of July here. The amount of casualties that were happening, he was pulled from his unit, like an engineering and a counterintelligence role, and all Marines are riflemen. He was sent ashore and he was killed in action. On the 25th of July, 1944, the Allied breakout from Normandy. So now that we have a foothold in mainland Europe, it's time to push north and push towards Germany. So James Sheehan, this is a very interesting one. He was a private first class with the 116th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division. And he was killed in action August 2nd of 1944. So he didn't live here, but I chose to include him because I found a photo of all the names of the men from the Diamond Shoe Company that served in World War II, and his name was highlighted as one of the ones that had been killed. So I think the Diamond Shoe Company chose to recognize him. But he was an Irish immigrant. He came from Ireland, and while he was at boot camp, he was not the only one from Marlborough that was an immigrant. So they actually took him and they brought him over to Canada, and they made him walk across the bridge, and they made him sign papers and said, "All right, now you're an American." The Rainbow Bridge, they called it. And he was killed in action near Vire, France. So I pointed out earlier the photo of the very first slide is the funeral of Clayton Lizotte. He was a private first class with the 47th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 5th Armored Division, and he was killed in action the 10th of August, 1944. So he was a star in the Marlborough High School track team and served in the 181st Infantry Regiment before the war. He was killed in action near Le Mans, France. Francis Thomas, private first class with the 119th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 10th of August, 1944. He was killed in action defending positions near St. Lo from a German counterattack. His wife, Lydia, who is the sister of Francis Brazu, lives in Marlborough and is still alive. We talk about the Gold Star families and the Gold Star connections here in Marlborough. There's still many, many around. Roger Boyven. So the name Boyven should be a little familiar. We have Harry Boyven on our monument downtown. This is Harry's nephew. So Roger was born in Marlborough. He served in the 329th Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 11th of August, 1944. He was born in Marlborough. He was raised in Southampton, and he was killed in action fighting, assaulting the citadel on the St. Malo Peninsula. So the Germans had fortified a citadel. John McNeil was a sergeant, the 15th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 5th Armored Division, and he was killed in action the 16th of August, 1944. His name is on our monument. I haven't found a whole lot connecting him directly to Marlborough, but he's from Southborough, so right over the line. And the story I've heard is that his brother was with the Graves Registration Unit. So after the war, there were men buried all over the place, and they were trying to bring them to central locations. And has anybody been to any of the American Battlefields, Monuments Commission cemeteries overseas? I mean, absolutely incredible. I highly suggest that if you're overseas to take a day trip for that. But his brother was supposedly the one that was able to bring his body home and he's buried over in Southborough. On the 15th of August, 1944, the Operation Dragoon, the Allied landings in southern France. So we always think of the Normandy invasions and like, that's it. It's kind of like in my head when I was a kid, we landed in Normandy and then we went to Germany. Well, we also landed in southern France. I served for 3 years on board the USS Mount Whitney, and every year we would go to Thiel-sur-Mar outside Caen, and we would go there for the liberation of the southern France in August. And the French people, I mean, they would be on the pier with Willys Jeeps and American ambulance, and they had all the women dressed as Red Cross nurses and all these guys dressed up. They always remember that. That was really unique to be able to participate in that every year. Donald Perry served in the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division. His brother compiled a book of papers that's about this thick. All the letters he wrote, where he was, different units he served with. So we know a lot about his time in the Army, the different units he was with. Sadly, he was captured by Germans and forced to dig holes for defense against artillery, not knowing that the Germans had captured Americans. He was killed in action when his position was attacked by American artillery, believing they were shelling the Germans. An interesting thing, while he was fighting in Anzio, they decided that they needed to find a way to get through minefields quicker. So they would have a tank go, because the tank's not going to get hit by, destroyed too bad by a mine, and they would tow sleds. And these guys would lay in the sleds with their guns, and they literally would tow them behind. And that was a short-lived thought process to get troops. Donald was actually involved with that, which was pretty interesting. Christy Matheson, Private First Class, the 142nd Infantry Regiment of the 36th Infantry Division. Longtime member of the 181st Infantry Regiment. His niece gave me a ton of photos of the 181 during their maneuvers in the South, even just up at Camp Devens, all that. And he was assigned as a replacement to the 142nd Infantry Regiment in Italy and participated in the breakout from the Anzio beachhead. Landing in southern France, he was killed near Jussapart, France. I'm not French, so I don't know how to say these names. I'm sorry. On the 25th of August, 1944, Allied troops liberate Paris. And shortly after liberating Paris, the Allies pushed right towards Germany. So Harry Boyven, so this is the Boyven name we recognize, Boyven Road off Farm Road, and he's on our monument downtown. He's a private first class, a longtime member of the 181. And he served in the 15th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 5th Armored Division, and he was killed in action the 17th of September, 1944. And he was killed in action right near the German border. He left behind a wife and 2 children. William Burns was a sergeant, another longtime member of the 181, and he served in the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 10th of October, 1944. He was a high school track and semi-pro football player before the war and participated in heavy fighting with the 1st Infantry Division. And he was killed in action near Harin, Germany at Hill 239, which was known as Crucifix Hill. The Germans had these hills completely fortified with bunkers, like the Siegfried Line. We think of concrete emplacements. He had actually been brought back to the States after Sicily to go for officer candidate training. And from what I can tell, I think they were just running out of troops, and they pulled a bunch of men out and sent them back to their units. Kenneth Miller. Kenneth Miller is probably our most interesting connection here in Marlborough. He probably never stepped foot in Marlborough. He wouldn't know what Marlborough is. He was a private, and he served in the 743rd Tank Battalion, and he's been missing in action since the 18th of October, 1944. So he was from Medford, and he was an assistant driver of an M4 Sherman tank. While fighting against German troops north of Aachen, Ken's tank was hit by a shell, and he was reported to have been buried nearby. His remains are still listed as missing in action. His parents settled in Marlborough after the war, and they have a memorial stone that says, in memory of, Kenneth Miller, down at Evergreen Cemetery. So I was doing some cemetery work with the veterans agent. I came across this gravestone, and I looked, and I was like, why does that say 1944? And start doing the research. One of his cousins has a whole Facebook page dedicated to him, and they're really trying to find his remains. They have the individual deceased personnel file. So I'll just take a second to talk about some of the sources I've been using. I tried to get in touch with a ton of the families. The families have been really forthcoming. Some folks in Marlborough. Alexis, the photos from Cosmos Capitanopoulos were, incredible that you were able to provide that. And so, that's like the best way to get in touch with the families, and they'll have as much as they can. The other sources are official military personnel files. So for the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard, and the Merchant Marine, those files are available. You can go and get them from the National Archives. So we'll include the boot camp photo. That's been really great for this project. In 1973, there was a fire in the National Archives, and 17 million Army records were burned. So it's made it really difficult for the Army records. The individual deceased personnel files were not burned, and those are also available. And those will really tell a lot about how the person was killed. They can be somewhat graphic. A lot of times if they were missing in action or their body wasn't identified right away, they'll have people write a little story about how they were killed and what, I was with him at this moment. This is what happened. And Ken's file is very thick because there were a lot of men that wrote this. I really do hope that they're able to find where Ken's body is. It was really heartbreaking to read the notes that his mother wrote, like, please don't leave my son behind. That really brought a tear to my eye reading those letters. So I hope that we are able to do that and celebrate that here in Marlborough. Joseph Cusella was a private in the 26th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, and he was killed in action on the 21st of October, 1944. So he was born and raised in Southborough, but made his home in Marlborough with his wife and 2 children. And he was awarded a Bronze Star for bravery for his actions during the assault on the German city of Aachen. So you can think of any city, fighting in an open field is one thing, but fighting in a city is a completely different way of warfare. You can just imagine the rubble, and you don't even know what's a road anymore. So pretty terrible. And these are the Langeliers we'll recognize. John Langelier was a technical sergeant, a longtime member of the 181, served in the 357th Infantry Regiment of the 90th Infantry Division, and he was killed in action on the 22nd of October, 1944. So he was wounded in action in France in August, and then again in November, and he returned to his unit shortly before being attacked, before attacking the German positions in the Maginot Line. So the Maginot Line was the French facing Germany, and they built a big fortification. We all know how that worked. The Germans just went around it. And the Siegfried Line is the German fortifications that they built along that line. So you can see that he was awarded a Purple Heart 3 times. So for those that don't know, the Purple Heart is an award for being wounded in action, killed in action. So being awarded it 3 times is pretty terrible, but I think it also, we recognize what type of man he was to continue to go back to his unit. Harold Conrad was a private in the 104th Infantry Regiment of the 26th Infantry Division. The 26th, the Yankee Division, that's our National Guard division here. So a lot of folks either have served in it or recognize that. He was killed in action the 17th of November, 1944. So I think we had a lot of folks that were great athletes here in Marlborough. So he was also a semi-pro baseball and football player. He was killed in action during an artillery attack near the Saar River. So I think he's the 3rd or 4th man I've mentioned that had a semi-pro athletic career. Donald Blanchette, private first class, with a 166 Combat Engineer Battalion, killed in action the 22nd of November, 1944. So combat engineers are a branch of the Army that are in charge of constructing roads and bridges and laying and disarming mines, as well as a lot of other things. But that's what they were doing near Nabing, France, when Donald's Jeep ran over a landmine and he was killed. Leon Lamar was a technical sergeant with the 47th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 5th Armored Division, and he was killed in action the 21st of September, 1944. Leon actually was in the National Guard for a long time, but he wasn't in the 181. He was with the Vermont Guard. So he was born and lived in Vermont and was a member of the Vermont National Guard. So pretty interesting there. He was living in Marlborough with his sister when he was mobilized for federal service, and that's why he's on our monument. We recognize him. And he was killed in action during the assault on the Siegfried Line. He was also awarded a Bronze Star. He's one of the few that I haven't been able to find the reason for that. I'm hoping to figure that out. And here's William Wakefield with his daughter. He was a private, 329th Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 4th of October, 1944. So he was actually a master sergeant in the 181 before the war. And from what I can tell, when the war broke out, I don't think the government realized how bad this was going to be. And they discharged a lot of guardsmen that had families or had been in for a long time. So he was actually discharged, and then later came back into the Army. So he had 2 young daughters and his wife. So he either re-enlisted or was drafted in 1944. He was wounded during a reconnaissance and died after his squad had to leave him behind. So he was wounded in the stomach so bad that they couldn't bring him back from the reconnaissance, and they left him thinking the Germans would go and give him medical attention. And they didn't. The Germans didn't go there. They left him, so he died in the field.
That girl was in my class.
Yep. So we'll talk about the home front. The military, much like any profession of arms, the training is equally as dangerous as the combat itself. Evan Woodward was a captain. He enlisted in the 26th of June, 1942, and he was at the Army Air Force's intelligence school, and he committed suicide the 8th of July, 1942. So he's barely in the military for 2 weeks. So suicide is something I think within the ranks of the military that we should be able to talk about a little more. And the reason for that is he was a World War I vet, and he saw a lot of combat in France, a lot of combat. And being back in the service triggered his PTSD, and that's the reason that he had committed suicide. He drowned in a river near the school. He was a very accomplished. He went to Dartmouth. He was a teacher for a long time. His daughters were very excited that I got in touch with them to kind of memorialize their father. James Gately was a master. So a master is a captain of a merchant ship, and he was on board the SS Wheeler, and he died of disease July 14th, 1942. So he's born and raised in Marlborough, longtime member of the Merchant Marine. John, I think one of your family?
Yeah, one of my cousins.
Yep. And he was working for the U.S. Army Transport Service when he died of disease in Seattle. I've been able to pull a lot of Merchant Marine files for some of the projects I worked on. Interestingly enough, I haven't been able to get his file. They say they can't pull it, but he probably has a very interesting story. So we talked earlier about Richard Worcester, who was 17 years old when he was torpedoed, or when he was killed on board Yorktown. And we have Henry Chandler Tucker. So Richard Worcester was the youngest at 17, and Henry Chandler Tucker was the oldest at 62. So another thing we talked about, we think of, we see the movies and the glorification of the war. It's all young men. Like some of these men were in their late 30s, early 40s, and Henry Chandler Tucker was 62 when he died. So he was a chief yeoman. He originally enlisted in 1897. He was born in the 1870s. He was working at the Naval Receiving Station in Boston, Massachusetts, and he died of a heart attack in September 1942. So he was a veteran of the Spanish-American War, World War I, and he was known to many in Hudson. He was a one-time commander of the Hudson American Legion Post. So a yeoman in the Navy is like an admin type of person. So on a ship, everyone has battle stations, but a yeoman is going to do a lot of the admin work that needs to be done. So he had actually retired, but knowing that they could use him in the receiving station in Boston to push recruits through and just do the paperwork, they called him back to active duty. So his grandson had a ton of really interesting photos from his whole career. If I listed the ships, would probably be here forever that he served on. Nicholas Sompetti was a private first class with the 339th Bombardment Squadron of the 96th Bombardment Group, and he died of an airplane crash the 2nd of December 1944. And so he was a radio operator aboard a B-17 Flying Fortress that crashed near Idaho Springs, Idaho. So as we get into this, there were quite a few aircraft that crashed. That was part of the training. Is you're taking a cross-cut of Americans, men, and putting them in uniform and having them run war machines with as little training as you can get them before you bring them to the front lines. And so accidents do happen. Arthur Hull, this is a name we won't recognize, Seaman Second Class. He enlisted in 1942, and he served with the U.S. Naval Armed Guard. So the Armed Guard was small detachments of men that were assigned to merchant vessels with very small guns. And that was the only thing the merchant ships had to defend. So maybe a 5-inch cannon, mainly, to try to defend against much. I don't think much of it worked. So he actually died of disease in November of 1942. So he lived in Marlborough as well as Southborough as a young man, and he contracted meningitis during an outbreak at the Armed Guard Barracks in Little Creek, Virginia. Edward Boudreaux was a sergeant with 24th Army Air Force's ferrying wing. He enlisted right after Pearl Harbor, and he drowned in the 30th of April, 1943. He was actually at the hospital at West Palm Beach for some. I haven't been able to find that, but he drowned while he was swimming nearby. So the Army Air Force's ferrying wing, and that you'll see this symbol a few times. This is like Air Transport Command. So, or anything that they needed to move with aircraft, this is what would do it, including the aircraft. They would have whole crews that would take the airplanes, bring them over to England, and then fly a broken one back. They needed to get all that equipment over there. Albert Algosi, second lieutenant. So he actually was in the National Guard in a quartermaster detachment, and then wanted to fly and be aboard aircraft. So he transferred to the Army Air Corps with the 504th Bombardment Squadron of the 339th Bombardment Group. And there was an airplane crash the 17th of May in 1943. So he was a bombardier. So his job was to figure out when to release the bombs when they were over the target. And the airplane crashed near Dyersburg, Tennessee. Edward Parrott was an oiler in the Merchant Marine. He served on board SS John H.B. Latrobe. He enlisted in March 1942. And he died in an elevator accident in New York, the 4th of August, 1943. So supposedly he was leaning on the elevator doors and they opened while I was riding up the elevator shaft. He just returned from a return trip to Murmansk, Russia. So that was the worst thing that the Merchant Marines could get assigned to do, was take ships up that far. And the Germans knew what was going on. They would do their best to torpedo them, fly airplanes out of the Norwegian countries and bomb them on the way. So this was a really bad run. The Murmansk run was one of the most dangerous trips merchant sailors embarked on in World War II. There's probably not a whole lot we agree on with the Russians, and the Russians don't agree with us on much. The sacrifices that merchant sailors made to resupply them in World War II is probably one of them. John Gately. So John, this is your namesake. This is John's uncle. Originally enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1940 before being accepted in the Naval Academy. He was serving as a midshipman, and he died of disease October 19th, 1943. So I think with the Marine Corps, and it would be your great uncle, General Ashurst, right? Yep. So this John Gately's uncle was General Ashurst, who was in charge of, that was his uncle, who was in charge of the Marine detachment in Shanghai when the war, Peking. Oh, excuse me. So a whole other thing we could talk about another time, but very interesting. And John provided a ton of photos of his uncle, both in the Marine Corps and with his time at the Naval Academy. Arthur White, machinist mate second class on board USS Simpson, enlisted in February 1942 and died of a train accident the 15th of May 1944. So he's not from Marlborough, but he's buried here, and he was from Foxborough, and he served on a destroyer on convoy duty in the Atlantic, and he was trying to get home for Mother's Day, and he was running to get on a train, and he fell underneath the train. Donald Smith was an ensign with Composite Squadron 83, and he died in an airplane crash the 10th of July, 1944. So he was a TBM Avenger pilot and crashed into the ocean off the coast of San Diego during a training exercise. So there's a memorial stone to him in St. Mary's, but they never recovered the body of him or the enlisted gunner behind him. So again, we're training people to operate aircraft, operate tanks. The Avengers were dive bombers, but you can't go so far. They had to learn how to do the dive bombing, and he went so straight down that he couldn't pull out of the dive, and it went straight in the ocean. James Kedian was a captain with the 69th Air Base Squadron, and he died of disease the 16th of July, 1944. So he was born in Marlborough, raised in Brockton, and he was a World War I veteran who stayed in the National Guard till 1923. He went back into the Army as an officer, and he died at the Walter Reed General Hospital. Not all men from Marlborough served in the American Armed Forces. Captain George Peter Evans with the 45th Group Royal Air Force Ferry Command. George was rated as one of the best instrumentation pilots in the world, and he was awarded the most excellent order of the British Empire by the King of England. So at the beginning of the war, how we got stuff up to England, you want to fly the most direct route. The most direct route is actually north and then back down. He was one of the ones that pioneered those routes. And when you're up north and everything is white with snow, that's where he learned those instrumentation pilot skills. He was lost at sea with a delegation of officials from the Canadian government when the airplane crashed on July 4th, 1945. His grandson was super excited when I got in touch with him and had a ton of photos. His wife was a Rockette. There's supposedly Time magazine cover that he's on flying outside Chicago. So pretty interesting guy. I got pictures of him at the pyramids on a camel. Very interesting. Albert Peltier, second lieutenant, the 434 Army Air Forces base unit, and he died aboard an airplane crash the 13th of August, 1945. So he was a P-38 Lightning pilot. He was killed in a mid-air collision 2 days before the war ended. William Ripley, Seaman First Class, the U.S. Naval Armed Guard, died of disease the 7th of October, 1945. So if you notice that date, that's after the war ended. So William served as a member of the Armed Guard on multiple merchant ships and sailed multiple convoys to the European theater. And he was discharged due to tubercular pneumonia. So he had tuberculosis, and he was discharged. And this is pretty common with the Navy, living in such close quarters in confined spaces. So if anybody's been in the Navy or been on a ship, it's very tight quarters. Obviously, if someone is sick, then everyone gets sick. And he later died from that disease. So we'll talk now about the air offensive over Europe. The thought process before the war, I actually was reading the other day about how Billy Mitchell, who is thought of as one of the fathers of the Air Force, was court-martialed and found guilty on all charges of insubordination because he pushed so much for a separate Air Force before World War II. He was actually awarded a Medal of Honor later. So we're talking about bombers going from Italy, North Africa, and England over and bombing the Germans in both France, Yugoslavia, Romania, and in mainland Germany, or Germany itself. Peter Desimone was a staff sergeant with the 577th Bombardment Squadron of the 392nd Bombardment Group, and he was killed in action the 13th of November, 1943. So he was a waist gunner aboard a B-24 Liberator, Miss America, and he was attacked by fighters and crashed into the North Sea on a bombing mission to Bremen, Germany. Did anyone see Masters of the Air? Anybody watched? So I tried to highlight a little bit about the different aircraft in this section. So George Shube, a name we wouldn't recognize. He was born in Marlborough but raised in Marblehead, and he was a star football player, and he actually went to play football at Michigan State. Was a first lieutenant with the 404th Bombardment Squadron of the 97th Bombardment Group, and he was killed in action the 27th of November, 1943. He was a navigator, so he would be the one that helped make sure they get back on a B-17 Flying Fortress there and back. And it was shot down on a bombing mission to Rimini, Italy. So we talked about the air medal earlier, which is here. So the air medal was really interesting with the Army infantry. For people in the Navy, Army, Marine Corps to get that award, that's kind of interesting that's not common. With the Army Air Corps at the beginning of the war, if they flew 5 missions, they would get an air medal. 5 more, and then they realized that they needed more missions. Then it was 10, then it was 20, then it was... So the silver leaf denotes 5. So he has a total of 9 air medals, if you get an idea of how many missions he flew. Pretty amazing. Joseph Welch. So Joseph's actually on the Hudson Monument, but he enlisted here in Marlborough with the 338th Bombardment Squadron and the 96th Bombardment Group, and he was killed in action the 31st of December, 1943. So he was killed in action on New Year's Eve. B-17, he was a gunner on a bombing mission in Paris, France. So Charles Jarrick was a sergeant in a replacement training unit which is an airplane crash the March 18th, 1944. So he's a star football and basketball player at both Marlborough High School and St. Anselm's, and he was a gunner aboard a B-24 Liberator that crashed after takeoff in Trinidad. So I believe he was a Marlborough High School football coach when he enlisted. And the Jarrick School in Marlborough is named in his honor. So there's quite a few photos we have of him. Miltiades Gikas was a staff sergeant with the 712th Bombardment Squadron and the 448th Bombardment Group. Was killed in action the 20th of March, 1944. He was a tail gunner aboard a B-24 Liberator who was shot down near Dieppe, France. His nephew had a ton of photos of him doing and training all over. It was pretty amazing. Here's a photo I actually recently got from the family. Albert Gilmore, the technical sergeant with the 579th Bombardment Squadron of the 392nd Bombardment Group, was killed in action May 28th, 1944. So he was born in Marlborough but raised in Westboro, and he was a very talented trumpet player. He actually went to school down in Atlanta for playing the trumpet, and he played in the there was an Air Corps band up at Westover Air Base. So really interesting. They called him Bebs, and he was serving as a top turret gunner aboard a B-24 Liberator Tondaleo when his turret was struck by shell fire near Zeitz, Germany. So he was the only crew member that was killed, and they actually have pictures of the turret that's complete gouged out. George Boudreau was a second lieutenant with the 339th Bombardment Squadron of the 96th Bombardment Group. So he was a pilot of a B-17 Flying Fortress aircraft that was shot down over Regensburg, Germany. And although he survived bailing out, he was impaled by a tree when he parachuted down. So this is his actual uniform that his sister donated to the Historical Society. The ribbons are replicas. I ordered those and we put those on. Those are the only thing that's not original. So I think it's really amazing that his sister was able to donate this, and we're able to highlight that tonight. A lot of the men that I've been able to get a little more in-depth on their personnel records, a lot of them learned to fly at Marlborough Airport. Like Marlborough Airport, it was really cool that we had that because, I think of getting on a plane and I just get on a plane. It's like getting on a bus. But for folks back then, it was incredible to be able to do that and fly the aircraft. I believe George learned a little bit of flying at Marlborough Airport. Bunny Lyle, we talked about. They were interested in this kind of stuff, and that helped get them into the flight jobs that they were looking for. Robert Nogler, second lieutenant, the 325th Bombardment Squadron of the 92nd Bombardment Group. He was killed in action the 4th of November, 1944. He was known as the boy tenor of Marlborough for his singing voice. He's a very talented singer. He was the co-pilot of a B-17 Flying Fortress that was shot down on a bombing mission to Hostelingen, Kathendorf, Germany. He was engaged to be married when he was shot down, and his fiance kept a box of all sorts of stuff, which I thought was incredible. That the connection, even so many years later, she felt so connected. So her daughter actually, I got in touch with her, Frances Minahan, and she has so many photos that she was able to share, which was really wonderful. Elmer Bemis, technical sergeant with the 853rd Bombardment Squadron, 491st Bombardment Group, was killed in action November 26, 1944. He's a radio gunner aboard the B-24 Liberator Firebird, which was shot down over Bredenbeck, Germany. So I got in touch with his family. They had a lot of baby photos of Elmer, but nothing that I thought he would like to be remembered as a baby with. They did have a lot of letters, and the letters were really, really great. I mean, he's pretty young, in his early 20s, and the letters are saying like, "Hey, I need some more money so I can go out and meet the English girls." And it's really, it still strikes you because you realize that this person's life ended, but it really gives you that sense of like who they were. So when we talk about some of these bombers that get shot down, if a bomber has 10 crew members or 6 crew members, if they shoot one bomber down, there's 6 men that get killed. So when we send out 80 planes and 40 come back, you get the sense of what happened during those bombing missions. And early in the war, that's what was happening. We would send a fleet of aircraft out, and half of them would come back. Elwood Algren, a technical sergeant with the 599th Bombardment Squadron of the 397th Bombardment Group, So he remained photoless for a number of years, quite a few years. His family was looking, and they finally found that box with the photo in it. So we were able to get this last year. So I was really happy that we were able to put a photo to his name. He was an engineer gunner aboard the B-26 Marauder Unconscious II, which was shot down bombing the El River Bridge. So he had served in South America and a number of places before being assigned over to Europe. We saw John Langelier earlier. Here's his brother, Daniel. He's a first lieutenant with the 343rd Fighter Squadron of the 55th Fighter Group, and he was killed in action the 17th of April, 1945. So he was shot down near Bautzen, Germany, and although his aircraft was recovered, his remains are not, and he's still listed as missing in action. So they found the aircraft. We actually got a phone call 3-4 years ago at the Historical Society, and there was a guy, his mother was German, had married an American soldier or airman, and she came to the States. But she was a student inside the school where this aircraft crashed. So the aircraft lodged in the side of the school, and the Germans made all the kids come out and march around and look at the pilot, as a propaganda thing about what they were fighting. And she always remembered that. So they do have a general idea of where he may be buried. It's got to be. They have the aircraft. So they're hoping they'll be able to find his remains. Alfred Bond. So Alfred really from Worcester, but he's buried here in Marlborough, Maplewood Cemetery. So he was a second lieutenant with the 524th Fighter Squadron of the 327th Fighter Group, and he was killed in action the 27th of April, 1945. So Alfred was a pilot of the B-47 Thunderbolt, the Boomer, that was shot down by German anti-aircraft fire near Frankfurt, Germany. His family had this photo or this painting made of him after they found out that he was killed. So the Allied push north of Rome. So John Sharp, this was one that took me a long time to research because in our Marlborough newspaper it said everyone would recognize John Sharp, but they spelled it without the C. So I'm looking for Sharp like I would spell it. But John was a manager of the W.T. Grant department store in Marlborough for a number of years. And he was a replacement to his new unit. And he was in Italy for a total of 4 days before he was killed. So he was a private with the 357th Infantry Division of the 85th Infantry Regiment. I have division there twice, 85th Infantry Division. He was killed in action the 10th of October, 1944. So you can get a sense of the number of replacements like we talk about the training. Like he didn't even have time to acclimate to what he was supposed to be doing before he was killed. Ralph Fillmore, motor machinist mate, 3rd class. U.S. Coast Guard Detachment M with Unit 195. And he died of an accidental death July 3rd, 1944. I tried to get in touch with his family. He was raised in Spencer, but he was born here in Marlborough. He's buried here in Marlborough. Nobody really knew a whole lot. He was working at U.S. Steel in Pennsylvania when he enlisted. He was married at the time, and it was really funny, the letters in there with his wife, like, where's my husband's pay? He wasn't sending her any money. He also got caught sleeping on guard duty and was in the brig for a little while. So, it's interesting. You get these, they're all people just like us. He was riding in the back of a truck with a big spool of wire when the truck driver stalled and the spool of wire flipped on top of him. That was in New Guinea. So the Coast Guard's really interesting. They're integrated with the Navy during times of war. They're kind of put under there, but they did a lot in World War II that we kind of somewhat forget about. And building bases. Milne Bay, New Guinea, was a huge base and a big depot area that we built up immensely. The 15th of September 1944, Operation Stalemate 2, the landings on Peleliu. This picture was always kind of tugs at the heartstrings. So Norman Schofield, Private First Class, 4th War Dog Platoon. And he was killed in action September 18th, 1944. His niece had a ton of photos that she was able to share and letters that his platoon commander, the lieutenant that was in charge, wrote. So Peleliu was much like every island campaign, but it was also a volcanic island. So when the bombs would go off, that volcanic rock turns into even more shrapnel. So they had a call go up that they needed stretcher bearers. So Norman and 10 other Marines volunteered to go forward and be the stretcher bearers to help their fellow Marines come back. And a giant Japanese mortar landed nearby, and it even said it in the letter. He didn't have a scratch on him, but the concussion was what killed him. I think for that action that warrants somewhere close to a Bronze Star for willing to go to the front for something like that. I do have a goal of trying to find what his dog was. He was a dog handler. He would have had a dog with him that would have been assigned to him. Kind of a goal of mine to try to find that. We'll see if that happens. The 20th of October, 1944, Operation King II, the Allied landings in the Philippines. Valmore Beauregard, they called him Red, so we can't see it here, but he obviously had red hair. Fireman first class. He was on PT 300. So we've all heard of PT 109, John F. Kennedy, same type of boat. He was killed in action December 18th, 1944. PT 300 was one of only a small number of PT boats that was sunk by a kamikaze. So it actually sounds like a pretty talented pilot to be able to hit a small boat like that. He was attacked near the island of Mindoro in the Philippines. I know some of my friends are in the back, and we did Battleship Cove last year, and that was pretty cool. They actually have a full-size PT boat you can really get in and look around at. Ernest Perry, Private First Class, 103rd Infantry Regiment of the 43rd Infantry Division, was killed in action January 31st, 1945. He was actually from Calais, Maine, but he was living in Marlborough with his wife and one son, and he was killed in action on the island of Luzon. Ernest D'Amico, Aviation Machinist Mate, 3rd Class, aboard USS Franklin, CV-13, was killed in action March 19th, 1945. So he served on multiple aircraft carriers before being assigned to the Franklin. He liked to stay out on liberty. He was AWOL a few times, and the shore patrol came and got him. So the attack that led to his death killed 806 other crewmen and was one of the worst attacks against a carrier that didn't sink the entire war. I don't know if anybody knows Nunzi Martino. Nunzi, I sat with Nunzi at his house and talked with him. He was also on board the Franklin, and he had a great storytelling skill. His talking about going to boot camp, and they gave him the wrong size shoes, so he marched back up and said, "These don't fit." That doesn't fly at boot camp. But he was on board, and he didn't remember seeing Ernie at all, but just an incredible story. And I think the WMCT-TV has interviews as well. Yep.
Yeah, about 6-7 years ago, they would sit down with him and Pappy Blue.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So on the 16th of December, everybody's getting ready for Christmas, and everything is going to be nice and quiet. And the Germans had a different idea. The last-ditch offensive by the Germans in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge. So Donald Everett, Donald was one of the Wayside Inn schoolboys. He didn't graduate from the Wayside Inn. He didn't like it, and he made it very known. I was able to get into the Wayside Inn archives, and they were really great to share that. He did not want to be at the Wayside Inn. He did not like anything he was being taught. So he left, went back to Hingham, where he was being raised, and went into the Army. He was a corporal with the 90th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron of the 10th Armored Division, and he was killed in action December 19th, 1944. So I'll highlight this here. This ribbon represents the Silver Star. He was awarded a Silver Star. So during the attack on Bastogne, which, if you're familiar with the Battle of the Bulge, the 101st Airborne, gets surrounded at the battle at Bastogne. He came across a bunch of men that were all from different units and all kind of discombobulated, and he took charge of them and led them back toward Bastogne. So for a corporal to do that is a pretty big deal. That's a very kind of lower rank in the enlisted end of things. Not necessarily meant to lead a bunch of men, but that's what he was recognized for doing. Joseph Buffard, Private First Class with the 262nd Infantry Regiment of the 66th Infantry Division. He was killed in action on Christmas 1944. He's raised in Hudson but living in Marlborough. He's the only man who has his name on the Marlborough and the Hudson Monument. He was one of 763 men killed when the SS Leopoldo was torpedoed and sunk in Cherbourg Harbor. The Germans got it with a torpedo, and the ship was sinking, but it was also Christmas, right? So everybody's kind of on like holiday stand down and enjoying Christmas. They didn't expect this. So the tugboats, the rescue ships that were coming out weren't fast coming out to get them. So again, it's Christmas and you're in the water. A number of men died from hypothermia. So Alexis, thank you. Here's some photos. Cosmos Capitanopoulos, private, 24th Armored Engineer Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, and he was killed in action the 28th of December, 1944. I believe he was killed stepping on a landmine near Bastogne. So he was a combat engineer. Again, they would have been trying to get the mines out so they could have paths to get tanks and trucks and men, everything. And then everybody, I think many people here recognize Cappy Kales, Cosmos. So this is his uncle. And Cosmos, the nephew, was the one that was killed in Vietnam. Albert Simpson, private, 319th Infantry Regiment of the 80th Infantry Division, was killed in action January 8th, 1945. He was originally assigned to a unit in the 10th Mountain Division with the ski troops. And I found some documents for the 10th Mountain Division archives that were pretty neat, all about that. I think he got sick, and they just kind of sent him to a regular infantry unit. He was killed in action near Luxembourg, Simpson Road in Marlborough. I live right there, so that's... Hector McKay, here's Hector with his twins, his daughter and his son. He was a private with the 422nd Infantry Regiment of the 106th Infantry Division, and he died of disease as a prisoner of war the 26th of January 1945. So he was a Canadian immigrant who was naturalized during basic training. So again, they brought him over the Rainbow Bridge and then brought him back and said, sign this and you're not American. The 106th Infantry Division was trained as a unit and absolutely gutted of all the experienced troops before they sent it overseas. And they put them on the line exactly where the Germans attacked. So they sent the most inexperienced unit exactly where they shouldn't have gone. But I mean, we had no way of knowing that. That's hindsight's 2020. So Hector left his, you can see here his kids. One of the twins is who I corresponded with. She had just one photo of her dad, and I took it out of the photo frame to take a picture with it with my phone, and 3 more photos fell out of the back. So that was really amazing. She kind of forgot they were back there. So that was really nice to kind of share that. Michael Jarek, private first class, 23rd Armored Infantry Battalion of the 7th Armored Division, and he died of disease as a prisoner of war the 16th of March, 1945. Longtime member of the 181, really good marksman. This guy could shoot. He has a ton of awards for being able to shoot. And he was captured near St. Vith during the Battle of the Bulge and died in a military hospital near Leipzig, Germany. So when we talk, growing up, everybody saw I watched a lot of military stuff, as is obvious, when I was a kid. But we like Hogan's Heroes and, some of these things that made the prisoner of war camp. And, Sergeant Schultz that's not what it was like. It was really dark. The Germans didn't have food for their own troops. They weren't going to give it to ours that were prisoners. So on the 7th of March, 1945, U.S. troops crossed the Rhine River at Remagen. It's the Remagen Bridge. Joseph Ferrecchio, private first class, 8th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Infantry Division. He was killed in action the February 9th, 1945. So he's a prolific writer. He wrote a ton of letters to the Clinton Item, and they posted a bunch of them, and his daughter had a ton of those. Really great to read. He was very well written, and he was killed in action on the German and Luxembourg border. Arthur Sharon, private first class, 304th Infantry Regiment of the 76th Infantry Division. He was killed in action on February 25th, 1945. So again, not a name we recognize on our monument. He was born in Marlborough, but he's raised in Boston. He was working at the port of embarkation in Boston as an electrician when he enlisted, and he was killed in action during a German attack on the German village of Holstum. Carlo Miele, first lieutenant, longtime member of the 181, was actually an enlisted man who became an officer, and he served in the 8th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 2nd of March, 1945. So we talk about D-Day. Carlo was one of the men that landed on Utah Beach on D-Day, and he fought with the 4th Infantry in the Hurtgen Forest, which was another large battle that was very terrible due to all the trees. So the artillery would hit the trees and just tear apart the forest. So the day he was killed, he was awarded a Silver Star for his actions near Willerath, Germany. So he came under, his unit came under attack, and it was a German sniper, and he kept going into the line of fire, directing his men so that they could try and get the sniper and get out of the line of fire when he was killed. Eddie Montanari was Sargent, 104th Infantry Regiment of the 26th Infantry Division, who's a star baseball player who played semi-pro baseball after high school. I found a lot of articles saying that the different teams he played with in the Hudson newspaper. He died of wounds received on the drive through the Fulda Gap. Joseph Duca, First Lieutenant, 83rd Reconnaissance Troop of the 83rd Infantry Division, was killed in action the 2nd of March, 1945. So again, an excellent football player at both Marlborough High School and St. Anselm's. And he was awarded for a Silver Star for his actions near Capella in Germany. So you can see that's an M8 Greyhound. These are the types of like fast reconnaissance vehicles that Joe would have been in charge of with his troops. So him and his troops were out doing a little patrol, and they came across a bunch of German tanks. And so looking out for his men, Joe, or they called him Duke, told that he pushed his men back, and he went in the line of fire. So all the German tanks went to attack him, and his men were able to get away. And so his nephew just posted another photo of Joe with all of his men in front of one of the Greyhounds. John Teller, Private First Class, 346th Infantry Regiment of the 87th Infantry Division, was killed in action the 12th of April, 1945. So he was born and raised in Marlborough, but he graduated from Swansea High School, where he was actually the class president. So to be able to go from high school, and then he moved his junior year, and then be the class president, you can tell what type of person he was. Obviously very likable. He was killed in action during an artillery strike near Sundramata, Germany. Angelo Karapulios, Private, 323rd Field Artillery Battalion, 83rd Infantry Division, was killed in action the 16th of April, 1945. And he was killed in action while bringing supplies in a truck to the front lines. So the truck that he was in was attacked by German tanks. They were able to recognize his body by the size of his shoes. They knew he had a size 9, and that's Wallace Gauscher Jr., Sergeant, enlisted the 25th of May with the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, and he was killed in action the 5th of May, 1945. He was raised in Hudson and was really like a longtime Hudson resident, but he was in Marlborough when he enlisted. He was killed in action in Czechoslovakia. Germany surrendered to the Allies on the 7th of May. So 2 days later, the war in Europe ended. The air offensive over Japan. Ralph Burns, Lieutenant Junior Grade, Torpedo Squadron 27, was killed in action March 1st, 1943. He was a TBM Avenger pilot, and he was actually awarded an air medal for sinking and attacking submarines in Casablanca Harbor. So again, the Navy wasn't a big thing for the Navy to give out air medals. Rafael Pietro Luongo, Private First Class, the 69th Bombardment Squadron of the 42nd Bombardment Group, was a tail gunner aboard a B-26 Marauder Crazian, which was shot down over Ricotta Bay in the British Solomon Islands. And so the parking garage over here is named in his honor. So he's an Italian immigrant, and his sister is still around, and she provided some pretty cool photos. He was born in Italy, and it was pretty funny. She has like a picture of him in his little like Italian fascist uniform when he was a kid. I thought that was neat. Alfred Sandini, so a number of folks will remember they repatriated his remains in 2019. He was a technical sergeant, 22nd Bombardment Squadron of the 341st Bombardment Group. Was killed in action the 15th of February, 1944. And he was a radio operator on a B-25 Mitchell aircraft shot down over Hanoi. So we recognize Hanoi as Vietnam, but it's French Indochina. During the war, the Japanese had taken that over. Grenville Baker. So we won't recognize his name on our monument, but he lived in Marlborough in the 1920s. He was a technical sergeant with the 868 Bomb Squadron. He's missing in action March 10th, 1944. So the 868 was kind of like a secret thing that we had. They were radar-equipped B-24 aircraft. And they were capable of attacking at night. So these were an absolute nightmare for the Japanese because they couldn't figure out how to counter this. We could fly aircraft at night and know exactly when to drop bombs, attack ships. And he served as a radio operator aboard the B-24 Coral Princess, lost on a mission over Rabaul. There's a couple books actually written about the 868 we have at the Historical Society. John Pomfrey, Sergeant, 490th Bombardment Squadron of the 341st Bombardment Group, was killed in action August 11th, 1944. He was a radio gunner aboard B-25 Mitchell aircraft in the China-Burma-India theater. In the 490th developed glip bombing to knock out bridges. They would ride in low, and then they would skip the bombs over the water like you skip a rock and hit the bridges that way. John's aircraft went down in Burma, and he is still officially listed as missing in action. Albert Dussault, second lieutenant, 21st Fighter Group, 413th, 21st Fighter Squadron, 413th Fighter Group, killed in action June 19th, 1945. So he was born in Marlborough, and he's buried here in Marlborough, but he was raised in Haverhill, and he crashed his aircraft while attempting to land on Ieshima, near Iwo Jima. Ernest Bergeron, Sargent, 52nd Bombardment Squadron of the 22nd Bombardment Group, was killed in action the 20th of June, 1945. So he was a central firearms control gunner aboard a B-29 Superfortress, which crashed on a bombing mission to Shizuoka, Japan. So when the aircraft crashed, it was, there's a fire and everything. They found a blackened canteen, and there's like a blackened canteen, something like that they do a ceremony every year in Japan. So the Japanese people actually found some of the bodies, and I think one person was still alive and died shortly after, but they respected the dead, and so there's that link between the Japanese and us there every year, and we're connected Marlborough because Ernest was on board that aircraft. Elmer Common was a sergeant with the 458th Bombardment Squadron, 330th Bombardment Group, died in an airplane crash the 22nd of June, 1945. So he was from Stamford, Connecticut, and he was actually went to the Hillside School in Marlborough, sponsored by the Daughters of the American Revolution, the local chapter. I tried to get in touch with his family, didn't get much of a response, couldn't really find a whole lot, except for kind of one little newspaper photo. So I got in touch with the Stamford High School, and they had the yearbook, and it kind of really hit me when they sent me his page, and it said, "Take me back to Marlborough." So he liked the Hillside School, he liked Marlborough, didn't really want to be in Stamford, Connecticut. And he was a gunner aboard a B-29 Superfortress Colleen, which crashed after takeoff on Guam. And the only survivor, I think, was a co-pilot. From the 1st of November 1943 to the 21st of August 1944, Operation Cartwheel, the invasion of Bougainville. Lloyd Lincoln was a master sergeant with the 112th Radio Signal Intelligence Company, and he was killed in action March 15th, 1944 on Bougainville. He was excellent with radios, and he was killed in action on Bougainville. He's buried here in Marlborough. Operation Detachment, 19 February 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima. Burr Hudson was a corporal, 21st Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division, and he died of wounds received on Iwo Jima the 2nd of March 1945. So he fought both on Bougainville and Guam, and there was a destroyer that was bringing Marines to one of the battles, or one of the islands that was sunk. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but pretty amazing. He was on board that ship as well. He was evacuated from Iwo Jima to a hospital ship, but he died during surgery. Operation Iceberg, the 1st of April 1945, the invasion of Okinawa. I've spent some time on Okinawa in my travels, and it's a pretty amazing. You don't get a sense for it now, though, because it's very built up. Gaetano Martinangelo, technician, 4th grade, the 711th Tank Battalion. He was killed in action the 22nd of April 1944. Gaetano was a crew member of a flamethrower tank that was struck by artillery on Okinawa. His remains were not recovered, and he is still officially listed as missing in action. So they think that they actually may have identified some remains. They're trying to do the blood, linking the blood to his family. So that may be another one that we are able to bury here in Marlborough. Raymond Lacouture was a private with the 59th Coastal Artillery Regiment, and he died of disease as a prisoner of war January 17th, 1945. So he was captured in the island of Corregidor at the very beginning of the war in the first few months, and he survived captivity. He was transferred on a hell ship to Taiwan, or they called it Formosa back then, and he contacted Berry and died. Romeo Natoli, motor machinist mate, 2nd class. He was on board USS Winooski, which was a fleet oiler, and the airplane crashed the 5th of May, 1945. So he was born in Marlborough. So he got a letter, notified that his wife had passed away while he was on board the ship, and he needed to go home and take care of his 2 sons. And so he got on board the aircraft, to go home, and the aircraft crashed, leaving his kids orphaned at home. Joseph Sullivan, Seaman First Class, USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, killed in action May 11th, 1945. So Joseph was born in Marlborough but raised in Quincy. He worked in the Quincy shipyard. He helped build the Bunker Hill. He worked at Bethlehem Steel Shipyard, and he was killed on board Bunker Hill. So victory of Japan is declared 14th August 1945. We dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, 6th of August, and the second on the Nagasaki, the 9th of August. I've been to Nagasaki multiple times. Again, you don't really understand it because it's built back up, but the destructive power of the atomic bombs. So occupation forces and demobilization. Sadly, there were a number of men that died after the war ended. Harold LaBelle, Staff Sergeant with the Medical Detachment, the 941st Field Artillery Battalion. He died of a vehicle accident July 28th, 1945. So he was born in Marlborough but raised in New Hampshire, longtime member of the New Hampshire Guard. He was awarded a Bronze Star for going 3 miles through a minefield to rescue men. So I don't like running. Running 3 miles is a lot. This guy went through 3 miles of a minefield. That to me is absolutely amazing. Christos Papas was a corporal with the 305th Troop Carrier Squadron, the 402nd Troop Carrier Group, and he died of an airplane crash the 10th of September 1945. He was raised on John Street, and there's a park. The park that's right on John Street is named in his honor. I think this is actually in front of his house, in front of that park, this photo. James McGee, Staff Sergeant, 1333 Army Air Force's base unit, died of an airplane crash November 3rd, 1945. So he served in the India, China, Burma theater, ferrying supplies over the Himalayas to fight the Japanese. He was killed when the transport aircraft carrying him and 39 other men returning home crashed in the Himalayas. They weren't able to get the bodies until the 1950s. That's how high up it was. One of his family donated, I think it's something like 200 photos of him that he took all over India. I mean, he sent everything home before he came home, thinking he was going to come home. Raymond Paquin, Private First Class, 277th Combat Engineer Battalion. He died of a vehicle crash a couple days before he was supposed to come on the ship to come home. He participated in multiple campaigns and was awarded a Purple Heart at one point. Henry Fry Jr., Private First Class, 330th Infantry Regiment, 83rd Infantry Division. He was wounded in action in December 1944 with the Yankee Division and then transferred to the 83rd, where he was killed in a vehicle accident in Austria, 9th of January 1946. Raymond Butler, Seaman First Class, USS Antietam. He served in multiple carriers and participated in Navy operations off the coast of Manchuria, in China and Korea. He was discharged from the Navy, and on his way home, I was told that he bought a car. His dad put it in the garage. He was all excited to come home, went back to the West Coast to get his discharge, was discharged, and then the airplane crashed in Wyoming. I think it was all returning servicemen. Wilfred Gassett, 2nd Lieutenant, 64th Bombardment Squadron, the 43rd Bombardment Group. So he was from Brockton, but he had family in Marlborough. There are some pictures of him here in Marlborough. He was a graduate of the West Point, 1946, and he was a co-pilot of B-29 Superfortress that crashed into a mountain in Vermont. And there's a cenotaph located, which is a grave that doesn't have a body, but it's a memorial in Maplewood Cemetery. And Louis Guglielmo, Corporal, 46th Troop Carrier Squadron of the 317th Troop Carrier Wing. He died of a vehicle crash right before Christmas in 1947 in Korea. So he became really sick during World War II with typhoid fever. He couldn't get into the Army, but he wanted to do his part. So even though the war was over, he enlisted in 1946. And sadly, he died in that crash near Busan. So I say a soldier's sacrifice is never truly forgotten if we always remember to say their name. That concludes the presentation this evening, but we'll be out on Memorial Day morning at 7 a.m. If you want to meet us at Hildreth School, we're going to do a run from Hildreth School down to each of the monuments, and we read the names and post the photos of not only World War II, but also all the way back through World War I, and we'll read the names all the way back through the Revolutionary War. So we've been doing that for a number of years now. If you don't want to run, you can just meet us at City Hall around 7:15. And that's concludes my presentation.